Let me introduce you to Jackie Fast, who is from Slingshot. Is it Slingshot Media?
Slingshot Sponsorship.
Slingshot Sponsorship, and you've been talking on exactly that subject here at STS in Inverness to a room full of entirely bloggers, I think, or bloggers and some industry as well.
Yeah.
And what were you telling them about sponsorship? Because that's not normally something anybody considers in this this particular sector.
I think the key thing is really about how do you monetize your audience, how do you monetize yourself, especially travel bloggers and blogging. You know, people are quitting their jobs and trying to make this their living, their main income source, all of that. And a lot of them are kind of going out into sponsorship without any experience and very little knowledge out there, if I'm perfectly honest. Very little good knowledge out there to kind of really understand how to cut through those things and actually get some sponsors involved. So we just went through kind of how to sell sponsorship in the current market.
How do you sell sponsorship? How do I sell myself, my own blog?
So I think it really comes down to understanding your assets. So I think far too often people look at their blog and they think, well, you know, Dell can put their logo on my blog and it'll be seen by thousands. And you know, that's not enough. And people kind of run around in circles wondering why Dell's not giving them £500,000. And actually it's about understanding what brands are after, how you can help them solve a challenge, and being that go-to person and really harnessing what the USP is that they can do that nobody else can.
And to that extent, I mean, you've got to do a certain amount of research on your, as it were, target sponsor, the person, the company, the brand that you think would work well with your particular blog.
Yeah, I think it's almost crazy that people don't do a ton of research. How do you expect people to part with £5? Yeah. You know, if you were walking down the street and somebody asked you for £5, you wouldn't give it to them. And so I think that is really, really important, and it's one of the messages I think we went through in the presentation.
And it's one of the things that a lot of pro bloggers should be able to grasp, because after all, one of the things that happened with professional bloggers is they started talking to destination marketing organizations and people in the travel and tourism industry about, in effect, marketing, you know, asking them what is it that you're trying to achieve, what message are you trying to get across, and this is how I might help you. So it's a sort of it's just a variation of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. One of the unique things about this event that I've noticed is, you know, there's about half the people from industry here and half the people from bloggers. Yeah. You don't see that very often. So if you go to a sponsorship conference, there's like 3 brands and about 1,000 people trying to target those brands to give them money. Yeah. And it's almost a nice change to see that partnership and that relationship, but it's more about how do you make it more effective. So some of the conversations that happened kind of before my talk about industries, how do we become more effective? How do we work with bloggers in the right way to create that trust, to own that authenticity? And from a blogger standpoint, you know, it's all about how do you work in partnership? Do you know what's actually going to be driving your sponsor's value? Do you understand what their objectives are? How are you going to support that? And it's really, once you kind of understand that, it just becomes a much richer experience. It becomes a much more valuable partnership for both people.
And an extended one hopes. If it works well, then it goes on. I wasn't at your talk. I really wanted to be at your talk, but I had to be somewhere else. But I'm guessing you also gave 1 or 2 examples for inspiration.
Yeah.
What would they be?
God, I gave a load. One of the things that I did talk about, which I think outlines the value of, I guess, the shift in market. So again, I go back to this thing about you cannot sell logos because logos don't actually do anything anymore. One of the examples in the case studies that I used was this Coca-Cola Polar Bowl, which is Coca-Cola's second screen advertising campaign around the Super Bowl, to which they weren't a sponsor of. You can probably Google it. It's on the Slingshot YouTube channel. But basically, they ended up getting 9 million people on their second screen website, whatever, with the Polar Bowls kind of interacting for 28 minutes in terms of dwell time. Now, the value of a 30-second slot on the Super Bowl is $3.5 million US dollars. So from media value alone, it's like $195 million dollars. So, you know, the way that we communicate, the way that we do anything as consumers has shifted radically. And it's really about how do you harness that through partnership.
And are brands that are not necessarily directly involved in travel and tourism, so you know, not airlines, not ferry companies or cruise lines or whatever, but other brands that are sort of there running alongside, for example, suppose, travel insurance or Wi-Fi providers, that kind of thing. Are those kind of people like Samsung or whatever, are they interested in this kind of a market, the travel market? Do we need to think outside the box?
You definitely need to think outside the box, but I don't think you should just think Samsung. So Samsung comes to mind.
Well, because I'm just a Samsung fan.
There you
I'm
go.
giving them a free plug.
That would help. Do you know, a lot of people, whenever I ask new clients who they want as a sponsor, everybody says HSBC. And the reason they say HSBC is because they see HSBC or Etihad. And that is not a reason to go after a brand, but absolutely, what you're talking about is non-endemic sponsors.
Yeah.
And how you go after non-endemic sponsors, it goes back to, do you understand what you can provide? Do you have a solution to help them with their business challenge? And absolutely, travel is a really sexy thing, and it's not just travel. I think one of the other comments is, you know, I need a holiday to save my life, I need a holiday to save my marriage. When you start thinking in those kind of esoteric terms, what is holidaying? From a personal perspective. And then when you start having that kind of a communication, you know, brands are about enriching a consumer's experience. Holidays very much fit within that. And
for individuals, there are bloggers, very successful bloggers, really good pro bloggers here. That's what this conference is all about. The cream of the crop are here. But all the same, the bottom line is, you know, we as individuals are small individual bloggers. Is it, there's a sort of a David and Goliath thing here. Is it easy to approach big brands? So I completely disagree with the David and Goliath thing. I think far too often people kind of either just assume that they can't do it, so they don't try, or have been turned down, so they assume it's because they're too big or they're too small or whatever the case is. Usually it's because the approach is wrong. Now, if you go to the MD of any of the biggest global brands in the world and tell them that you can help them do their job, I guarantee you they want to hear from you. You knock on the door with something that everybody else is selling for a price that's completely overvalued from what everybody else is selling, they will never pick up the phone to you. And so it's all about that. People are still people. You can still pick up the phone. You know, I speak to probably some of the world's biggest global CEOs, and it literally is really easy to get in touch with them if you have something for them. And is there must have been a point for you when you started, when you picked up that phone for the first time. Good, yeah, well, when I was much younger. Really, I think it's just a big misconception that it's hard to speak to these people, and it is really hard to speak to them if you don't have anything to offer. And I don't think it's fair for, you get calls all the time for PPI insurance. You hang up the phone right away. Right? Yeah. So that is no different from a marketing director getting called about something that has nothing to do with their business, doesn't help them, doesn't solve any solution, and people wonder why they're getting hung up on. So evaluate what you have to sell, evaluate what your own product is, evaluate what your target sponsor needs and is looking for, and then be confident. Perfect.